Okay, English Colonization Part 11. We're continuing with Roger Williams and what got him in trouble. I want to tell you up front here that few Americans recognize or realize what a hugely significant contribution Roger Williams made. I've posted a video, which is an interview with a scholar who wrote a very, very deeply insightful biography of Roger Williams called Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul. That's worth a look. Even internationally, he was regarded as a major figure in the Reformation. Geneva, Switzerland, being kind of the capital city of the Reformation to this day, there's a memorial there with statues of the four they considered to be giants of the Reformation. You've got Martin Luther, of course. You've got John Calvin. The third one, I'm going to guess Ulrich Zwingli. You never heard of him. And Roger Williams. Okay. Now, the next question that got him in trouble, this was fairly quickly, was he was talking to the issue of whether the civil government could enact the Ten Commandments into law. And the Ten Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, fall into two parts. The first four have to do with the human being's relationship with God. The other six, 5 through 10, have to do with relations between human beings. Williams had no problem with the second table, the last six of the Ten Commandments being enacted into law. No problem with that. The first four, however, this would be the state, the government, interjecting itself between a human being and God. Williams couldn't see that. So, and that factors into his idea that church and state should be completely separate. He's not trying to protect the state from the church. He's trying to protect the church from the state. Anyway, Williams just wouldn't leave this stuff alone. The leadership of the colony perceived it as a threat. Now, there are people who thought he was a threat, but still considered him a friend, like John Winthrop. Winthrop advised Williams kind of through back channels, well, I don't know what's going to happen here. You might be best advised to leave. So Williams left in the winter of, I think, 1636, spent the winter with some Indians he had come to know and respect, and then the next year traveled south to the banks of the Narragansett Bay. This is in what's now Rhode Island. If you look at Rhode Island, it looks like an inverted U like that. Anyway, he established a settlement there and named it Providence. In the Puritans' vocabulary, Providence refers to God's provision for people's daily needs. And Williams proclaimed a limited form of religious toleration. Now, it only extended to people who professed some version of Christianity or other, but as long as you did that, nobody's going to hassle you, at least as far as the government's concerned. Now, it didn't have a charter or anything like that, but it was outside the jurisdiction of Massachusetts. And it quickly became a magnet for misfits. People who couldn't get along with their neighbors, people who just liked to argue, would flock to Providence, Rhode Island. And 150 years later, people are still calling it the home of the otherwise minded, or sometimes Rogues Island. There are issues later where they did not exactly cover themselves with glory. Anyway, so Williams establishes that. In 1643, I think it was, he journeyed over to England, which was then in civil war, and Parliament, which was fighting against the king, granted a charter creating the colony of Rhode Island. Okay, time went by. The king lost the war. There was like a republic of sorts for 11 years called the interregnum, or the period between the reigns, that's 1649 to 60. But then they brought the next king back, the son of Charles I. And Williams made another trip over to England, and Charles II was more than happy to grant him a charter, including authorizing freedom of religion, because King Charles II, for reasons of his own, liked the idea of freedom of religion. He was a closet Catholic himself, and thought that that would be a good way to protect Catholics from persecution, and I suppose it would be. Okay, Williams was in and out of authority in his in that colony on and off for years and years and years. Lived to a very great age, and you know you've won when your political adversaries adopt your own principles. It seems there was a very, very radical religious sect known as the Quakers. I think I mentioned them before in some other context. That term Quaker was a term of ridicule because it alleges that these people, calling themselves the Society of Friends, would work themselves up into such religious ecstasy they would literally shake physically. I can't really see that being true, but anyway, Quakers are not welcome in Massachusetts Bay because they're very radical. They refuse to go along with any social conventions, which still held strong in English America. For example, if you're a man, you have to tip your hat or bow to your social superior. Women are supposed to curtsy. All of that, they were holding on to that. Quakers refused to do that. And it's going to sound wild, but Quakers thought they were authorized to disrupt church services, the people that were not the same as them. So they found a handy way to do that. Young Quaker women, while church is going on, young Quaker women would take all their clothes off and just prance down the center aisle of the church congregation. That could be distracting. So, and the Puritans are also sensitive about, they don't want the king to think they're just wild and crazy or will cancel a charter. Anyway, with Williams not in power in Rhode Island, his political adversaries allowed that Quakers could find shelter there as long as they didn't try to disrupt anything. So the concept of freedom of conscience. We owe a great deal to Roger Williams for the concept of freedom of conscience. And it always surprises me how many people there are today who just don't go along with stuff like that. Roger Williams. The other high-profile case involved a middle-aged woman named Anne Hutchinson. Anne Hutchinson was the wife of a wealthy merchant, and they were followers of a Puritan minister named John Cotton, I believe it was. And when John Cotton immigrated to Massachusetts soon after the colony's founding, they came too. They had a large number of children. Can't tack down exactly how many. I've seen one source that said at 15 and others at 11. That's enough to go around. Anyway, they came to Massachusetts. Okay, and what got Anne Hutchinson in trouble was that she was doing something that would not be considered odd today among church people. She started holding sessions in her home once a week to attempt to decode the Reverend John Cotton's sometimes mysterious sermons. It was kind of a hard man to follow. But Anne Hutchinson was very well versed in the Bible and all of that. And she discovered a talent for being a spellbinder. The time came when almost a third of the population of Boston was showing up at Anne Hutchinson's house once a week just to listen to her. Okay, she began to sense her power, and it went to her head, unfortunately. For example, she once informed her eager listeners that there were only 2 preachers in all of Boston who were even saved, just to put it in normal terms. And you didn't even need to pay any attention to any of the others. Well, that's a serious threat. She was also flirting with a heresy that John Cotton was skirting the edges of. It's called antinomianism, and it holds that since Christians are saved purely by the grace of God, that relieves them of any obligation to follow any other kind of law, or any kind of law. Well, it's a bit on the dangerous side. So Governor Winthrop couldn't stand Ann Hutchinson and had her brought in for questioning a time or two. And finally, and this is about the time as the just right behind the Roger Williams controversies, they brought her in for questioning. Now, this is a fishing expedition, as they call it. They don't really have anything they can charge her with. But they questioned her hours on end, like 12 hours a day for 3 or 4 straight days, hoping they could just wear her down and get her to trip up and say something they can hold against her. It almost didn't work. Now, if the colony had been run by trained ministers skilled in biblical theology, they probably could have done it sooner. But they're not. They're businessmen and lawyers. She's way ahead of them on that. She knows what they're looking for, manages not to give it to them until finally the strategy paid off. I think it was late on the third day. Everybody's tired, frazzled, nerve endings. I use the word again, frazzled. And she threatened them. She said that God would punish them, meaning the judges here, and this whole state, unless they drop these proceedings. I'm sure the members of the general court stared at her open-mouthed. What did she just say? It sounded like she is claiming that God has singled her out and revealed to her what he meant to do next. Something that Orthodox Christianity holds, that that's something God discontinued somewhere along about the 1st century, many centuries before. So one of the inquisitors asked, "How do you know this, Mrs. Hutchinson?" And her reply was, "By a direct revelation." Okay, that's what they've been looking for. Thank you, ma'am. So they then proceeded to bawl her out for stepping outside the quiet role women were expected to play, and sentenced her to be banished. So get gone. So with her husband and her younger children, she had older adult children who remained prominent in the colony for a century and a half. After that, they left Boston and went down to Providence and joined Roger Williams. And then it is believed that they were probably wiped out in an Indian attack on Long Island in the year 1643. Okay? So she had threatened the authority structure. She was a bit off base theologically, but this is not a big yawning gap theological issue. It's how they handled dissent. They really didn't tolerate it much. I tried to find a decent video on Ann Hutchinson, and I found several videos. I did not find any that met my standards. They wanted to place her in a 20th or 21st century context and make her a feminist hero and all of that without really anywhere near enough context of her own time. So I did not find any of those to be worthy. Okay. One other thing that has to do with dissent, I mentioned the Quakers. They're not popular, they're not welcome, but, and this is kind of not the last chapter in this, but it's the last big one. They won over a convert. A local girl named Mary Dyer joined the Quakers, and no one is ever more enthusiastic or militant than the recent convert. Well, she made herself very busy trying to persuade other people that she knew in Boston to join the Quakers as well. Can't have that. So thus began this charade of a thing where she was brought up on charges and banished and told not to return, but she returned. And they kept notching it up. Finally they said, if you don't stop this, we're going to hang you. And then they changed their minds. Well, you just leave, don't you come back, or next time we really will do it. It's one like 6 or 7 rounds of this. One time she was actually on the gallows with a noose around her neck, and they relented. They didn't want to hang her, they just wanted to get her gone. So that opens the possibility she may have been seeking martyrdom. We'll never know. But eventually, to their great discredit, they carried it out. She swung from the rope.